Hey everyone, welcome back to Mrs. B History. Today we're heading to the 20th of September 1066, 5 days before Stamford Bridge and only a few weeks before Hastings, to a muddy strip of ground outside York called Fulford. It's the forgotten battle that wrecked England's Northern Army and set off a domino effect that changed everything. Vikings, family drama, brutal tactics, and a stream that turned into a death trap. So let's get into it. England is on the edge in 1066. After taking the throne in January, and William of Normandy's declaration that he was the rightful King of England after a promise made to him years before by Edward the Confessor, along with an oath he said that Harold had made in 1064, King Harold Godwinson expected William of Normandy to invade from the south. So during the summer of 1066 he was busy on the south coast with his men, watching the Channel and waiting for invasion to occur. Meanwhile, whilst Harold was down south, another threat sailed out of the north. Harold Hardrada, the ruthless and experienced King of Norway, had teamed up with Tostig Godwinson, Harold's recently exiled brother, who held a serious grudge against him. For 10 years, from 1055, Tostig had ruled Northumbria as Earl until a revolt in 1065 kicked him out. Tostig had been accused of failing to defend the north against the Scottish King Malcolm's raids, of taxing his people too heavily, and of having other nobles illegally killed. When the northern earls rebelled against his behaviour, Harold, acting as chief adviser to Edward the Confessor, had Tostig exiled, despite Edward initially wanting to raise an army against the rebellious northern earls. Given the accusations against Tostig, Harold felt that he had no choice but to side with the rebellious lords, but that didn't stop Tostig from resenting his older brother and joining his enemy. And so Tostig said to Hardrada, "York is rich, I know the roads, people will join us, let's go." Determined to take the English throne, and with the help of Tostig, a native of England who knew the north well, in mid-September Hardrada arrived with a huge fleet. While medieval sources argue over the exact numbers, some think that Hardrada arrived with between 200 to 300 warships carrying up to 10,000 Vikings. Prepared for invasion, they sailed into the Humber, pushed up the Ouse and landed at Rickle, which was about 10 miles south of York, on the 18th of September. From there, York was their destination, which had been the capital of a Viking state only a generation earlier. With Harold still down south, defence of the north fell to Earl Morcar of Northumbria and his brother Earl Edwin of Mercia. They raised what army they could as fast as they could, gathering the fyrd, who were the local militia, thanes and retainers, along with some housecarls. There were some good soldiers, but time was short, and so were their numbers likely to have been smaller than the Norwegians. With limited time, they decided that rather than stand behind the security of York city wall, that they would instead move to block the road to York to stop Hardrada reaching there. As a result, they met Hardrada and Tostig near the village of Fulford, squeezed between Germany Beck, a stream, and marshy ground. It was a narrow battlefield and great for a shield wall, but it would be risky if they were pushed back. The English plan was to form a shield wall across the approach to York. It was likely that there were housecarls in the centre, Edwin on the right near the beck, while Morcar was on the left near marshier land. The Norwegian plan consisted of Hardrada choosing where to hit the English troops. He probed the line, then focused on the English right by the beck so that he could put pressure on the troops. If he cracked one wing, he believed he could roll up the rest. The terrain was important for the outcome of the battle. There was the beck on one side, marsh on the other side, and very little room to manoeuvre. If either English wing buckled, there was nowhere good for them to retreat. Initially, the wall held. The Norwegians slammed into the shield wall, and its close quarters was chaos. Axes on shields, spear thrusts over the top, men shoving for just inches of ground, and for a while the English held firm. You could hear the crash of wood on iron, and men yelling to keep the line tight. But then Hardrada intensified his attacks on Edwin's right near Germany Beck. Whether by sustained pressure or a clever flank across the stream at a shallow point, the English right began to give way. Once the gap opened, panic spread and the right buckled. With the right compromised, the shock spread to Morcar's left. However, behind Morcar's men lay worse than the enemy's. Behind them lay the marsh. As they were shoved back by the Norwegians, they became bogged down. Chroniclers later claimed that the dead piled so deep at the stream that Norsemen could cross without wetting their feet. This was probably an exaggeration, but it paints a clear picture of the scale of the slaughter. Finally, after many deaths and much resistance, the shield wall collapsed. It was now a scramble for York. This was when most casualties happened, with men running away in their armour, exhausted and making themselves easy targets. Many drowned or were cut down around the beck and marsh. Edwin and Morcar survived, but their army did not. The road to York was open, and on the 21st of September, with no more fighting, the city surrendered to Hardrada and Tostig. Buoyed by their victory, the Norwegians demanded hostages and supplies and set a meeting near Stamford Bridge, the place that was to become famous 5 days later. Here they let their guard down, which was to prove a fatal mistake. The Norwegians won for a few reasons. Firstly was their numbers. The Norwegians most likely outnumbered the English on the day. Whilst the Vikings had up to 10,000 men, it is thought that the Anglo-Saxons had only around 6,000. This advantage allowed the Norwegians to rotate fresh attackers and concentrate force where it hurt. They also had more experience. Hardrada was a career commander, and he had a lot more experience than Edwin and Morcar. Also, Hardrada's army included many seasoned fighters compared to the Anglo-Saxons. Edwin and Morcar were brave, but this was their brutal first big test, and they were no match for the Viking leader. The terrain and tactics also played a part. Edwin and Morcar stationed their army with Marshland at their backs. This meant their troops had nowhere to go if they were pushed back. Meanwhile, the Norwegians focused their strikes near Germany Beck, squeezing the English line and letting the marsh do half the killing. This was a smart and ruthless strategy. And timing was also important. The Norwegians had 2 days after landing to rest and to organise. Meanwhile, the English had to rush assemble and fight almost immediately, giving them little time to prepare, strategise or rest. And lastly, the Anglo-Saxons ran. When they faced defeat, the English army broke and tried to run away into the marsh. Unfortunately, they got stuck in the swampy ground, and that is where many were cut down. As a direct result, the Northern Army was shattered. The feud of Northumbria and Mercia was broken. They lost many of their weapons, their units were scattered, many were wounded, and many had died. It meant that Harold, who had been in the south waiting for William, had to recall his troops after disbanding them to help with the harvest. He had to force his men to march north in a very short amount of time to attack Harold Hardrada and Tostig at Stamford Bridge on the 25th of September. This he did largely with his southern troops, as the northern earls couldn't contribute much. They were wrecked from Fulford. This had a huge impact, for when in October William Duke of Normandy finally invaded, he met an exhausted Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Hastings. So just to reiterate, Fulford wasn't just another battle, it was the first link in the chain. Fulford led to York's surrender, which meant that Harold was forced to march north. This led to Stamford Bridge, causing his army to be exhausted for the Battle of Hastings. But why is Fulford often forgotten? Well, mainly because it's overshadowed by the big headliners. The dramatic win at Stamford Bridge by Godwinson and his men just days later, and then the world-changing defeat at Hastings a short while after that. Also, English chroniclers didn't love writing about English defeats, and this was a bad Anglo-Saxon defeat. Also, although as you can see from the slide it was included in the Bow Tapestry, Norman sources obviously focused on William, so although Fulford did get a few lines written about it, the other battles, particularly Hastings, held the spotlight. However, removing Fulford from the story and 1066 makes a lot less sense. The Battle of Fulford explains why Harold's northern support vanished and why his army was worn down by mid-October. So, just a few points to remember. The marsh trap. Germany Beck looks harmless on a sunny day, but at Fulford it became a body-strewn barrier. The grudge match. Tostig's fall in 1065 and return 66 turned a family drama into a national crisis. And York's choice. After Fulford, York surrendered without a siege, proof of just how decisive the defeat was. So that's Fulford, a fierce fight, clever use of terrain, and a defeat with massive consequences. Remember the chain. Fulford helped to shape Hastings. If this has helped your GCSE revision, hit like, subscribe to Mrs. B History, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next stop, Stamford Bridge. See you there.